You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This has been a very busy time in the world of women's hockey. A lot of big announcements coming up, so it's great to have Erica L. Ayala back with us for our bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. And Erica, where do you begin? So many big things happening right now.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of expected this with such a short runway for the Professional Women's Hockey League. We knew that a lot of announcements were going to have to come. The league is getting ready for an evaluation tournament in Utica, New York. And so the first thing that was announced alongside the National Hockey League was that with the expansion of the NHL All Star Weekend to start on Thursday, one of the activities on that Thursday, the player draft, Man of the Year, and then there will be a 3-on-3 showcase. Now, a women's showcase. Those who are familiar with the NHL All-Star Weekend since I'd say about 2019, 2020, you know that there has been a slow integration of women from the U.S. and Canadian national teams as a part of the showcase. Kendall Coyne-Schofield stands out as being able to slot in the fastest skater, and then Sarah Nurse pulling a Forsberg last year in Florida. But this is the first time that the NHL has designated a specific women's pro league to participate in the All-Star festivities. We did see several years back that the CWHL and the NWHL played an exhibition at the Winter Classic. That's when I guess it was being hosted in New England. That being said, that was an unfortunate injury for Dena Lang, who played at the time for the Boston Pride. So it's good to see that the PWHL has been able to get integrated. I spoke to Jana Hefford earlier this week. It sounds like this has been something that's been in the works for a little bit, and the PWHL schedule was taken into consideration as they were planning to slot into the NHL All-Star Weekend, which of course leads to our next piece of news.
Yeah, we have, not only do we have opening games, home openers that were announced with great fanfare, but we have a full schedule for all teams and buildings for all of those games, which has been long awaited information.
For sure. So the PWHL will tip off on January 1st. So we've been saying that they plan to drop the puck in January. They plan to drop the puck in January. Well, they are not going too deep into January. On January 1st, they will host their first ever game. And then throughout that weekend, all 6 of the teams will play. Again, in my conversation with Jana, I asked her about perhaps an activation at the Winter Classic. Of course, the Seattle Kraken will be hosting the Golden Knights on January 1st at T-Mobile Park. She did say that was a part of the conversations, but the league, according to Hefford, really wanted to emphasize having its opening games in their own markets. So I think that does make a lot of sense to have fans that are in the areas that are being represented by the 6 PWHL teams to have kind of first dibs, if you will, on seeing the league in action. And yes, Rachel, as you mentioned, we also have a schedule, and the schedule will take the league through May. And it's about 76, I believe, games. And they will play through May. They're going to take a break, of course, during the IIHF Women's World Championships, which will also take place in Utica this year, or 2024, I should say. We're not quite at 2024 yet.
And talk to me about the rinks. Where are the teams going to play?
Well, it's somewhat of a mix between what we've seen in women's hockey in the past, such as the Zongas Arena in the Massachusetts area. But we also see that there's some NHL facilities that are being utilized. We've talked about this before with Minnesota. They were one of the first teams that we had an inkling that they would play at Excel, which of course is where the Minnesota Wild also play. Actually, the new arena in Long Island is also on the list for PWHL New York. They will also, though, spend some time in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So not every PWHL team is going to have the same home ice. And that is something that we heard early on from Stan Kasten, who represents the Board of Governors. Jana Hefford has said that as well. And in talking with Jana, I also talked to her a little bit about the reporting that the league, the PWHL, is going to use AHL and NHL rules. And one of the big things when it comes to, well, there's two things really that will stand out. I think one caters more towards a men's hockey crowd and another one more interesting to a women's hockey crowd. So I'll start with the women's hockey crowd being very curious about the use of the trapezoid. That's not something that we see in women's hockey and at international ice or college rinks and the like. And so some of the PWHL teams will play in rinks where there is no trapezoid. And it sounds as though from my conversation with Jana earlier this week that she wasn't exactly sure where they were going to land with using a trapezoid, because there will be one in NHL arenas. As I mentioned earlier. So it sounds like some things are still very much in the works, or at least being finalized. But the emphasis on using AHL and NHL rules had to go by officiating. And we do know that Jana Hefford, who is the senior vice president of the PWHL, has said that the NHL has been a really good kind of mentor as they're going through this, and has offered all kinds of support. And I deduced from our conversation that one of the things that the NHL perhaps and other advisors suggested is that if they really wanted consistent officiating and be able to use officials that were familiar with a very specific type of rule book, that using AHL and NHL officials was the best scenario. I found that a little bit interesting, Rachel. As you know, a lot of the promotion of this league has been that it's best players in the world competing against each other, which means that there are a decent amount of Olympians representing not just the United States or Canada, but other countries as well. And it seemed like a no-brainer to perhaps just use IIHF rules. However, that's not what the league is doing. And it again sounded like that was an advisement that the PWHL was given for consistent officiating. And so that led me to ask Jana about whether there's a little bit of an opportunity for the PWHL to be innovative when it comes to women's hockey. And the second topic that I mentioned being, of course, body contact. There's not any legal emphasis on legal body contact that a player can make in any level of women's hockey if they're not playing the puck. And of course, at all levels of hockey, we're seeing that body contact along the boards or within that area along the boards is definitely being officiated differently. There's no emphasis really on what that will look like. The AHL and NHL rules will be modified specifically for body checking. There's not going to be, open ice hits or anything like that in women's hockey. I did also ask about visors, because of course we see at the AHL and NHL level that male hockey players and AHL, NHL hockey players wear visors. And she said, if I'm being honest, much to my excitement, that there is not only going to be no change in helmets, so it will be full face protection, either bubble or cage, but also that there's really no interest in changing that. I'm always of the opinion that I just think full face coverage sounds like an important thing in hockey, but that's just me. And then I did ask about neck guards. This has obviously been a conversation in hockey, even for the Seattle Kraken, the team that I cover. We've seen Yanni Gourde experimenting with different neck guards. And Jana Hefford said, for now, the PWHL will not mandate neck guards, but they are being highly recommended. And the PWHL is making every effort to provide guidance and to provide any equipment and to also follow the technology as they move forward. So again, not mandated within their rule book, highly recommended, and the PWHL expects to follow the technology there. But just another point when it comes to officiating, there will be, it sounds like, an opportunity for the PWHL to work with USA Hockey, Hockey Canada, even the NHL, the AHL, and to do a little bit more officials or training for officials and combines like we see in other leagues. That was something that Jana Hefford mentioned. She didn't expect for that rollout to be for this year, and they will just lean on the expertise of those officials that are familiar and that are trusted to enforce consistently. She talked about that very, very often, the consistency. That's what they're going to lean on. But she mentioned something interesting, Gil, that she's under the impression that there might be players, even after the first season and certainly beyond that, that will step away from playing hockey, and that making sure they have a good pipeline for being able to train and build officials that are going to work their game will also benefit some players who maybe in the PWHL or really otherwise want to transition into officiating after they play.
That's really interesting. And also, with the hybrid rules potentially coming into place between IIHF hockey and NHL, AHL style hockey, because more of the women officials that have come up the ranks have done so on the IIHF side of things. And so to have them transition into AHL, NHL rules is going to take some time and training. So I'm glad they're doing that.
Yes, absolutely. And to your point, there was an emphasis in prior versions of women's hockey to have women officials. And again, those are usually at the international level. However, we have seen at the AHL level in particular that there's been some headway. And I would like to think that at least part of that is because you have Haley Moore, who used to work with the NWHL, and I don't think she crossed over into the PHF era, but she worked with that league and was a president of the Boston Pride, and of course their first GM. So she's working with the AHL now in an executive role, and we've seen that there has been some emphasis on having more women be trained with their rule book.
Very, very good. And also now I see that the roster formation is going to take a little bit more shape. Talk to us quickly about that.
Yes, for sure. So we knew that there would be a training camp roster, and this is something that, again, you see not just across hockey, but in a lot of sports. You have a training camp crew that you have to make your camp competitive. These are players, some that are signed, some that aren't, and then you have people that you invite to camp. So we're still waiting for that list to officially be announced by the league. Some reporters have already been reporting on it, but we know that those rosters, have been trimmed down. And as I mentioned, there's an upcoming evaluation camp in Utica, an emphasis on evaluation, because the theory, at least, is that some of those players that have been waived, they can be evaluated by other teams at those camps. So we're waiting to see if other teams will pick up some waived players, add them to their eval camp roster, and potentially find their way on a PWHL roster once those are officially announced closer to puck drop.
All right. Well, busy time, very exciting in women's hockey. Erica, thank you so much. Always great to have you here. We have got a lot more to discuss on today's show. A busy weekend of NHL action coming up. We'll have all that and more next on the Locked On NHL podcast.